talking a little bit about what a great turnout we had for this talk. We've been running this series for about a year now, IMS has, and I would say I think this is the one that is the top turnout so far. So clearly talking about COVID and how that relates to us as moms is very important. So today we are going to be doing the first part of it will be allowing Dr. Nicole Wiley, Dr. Jessica Leveto, and Dr. CohenMiller to present some of their most recent research. So clearly this is not polished and already out in the world because most of us are still sort of working on making sense of the numbers and the data and the analysis and all of that. So it's pretty raw at this point, but we wanted to get this into the world because a lot of other people are starting research on the same subject matter, and I thought that it'd be useful to other academics. But also personally, I think we're all curious to know how other people are experiencing the chaos and the crisis that is certainly historic and we're living through. So we have 3 experts that have been doing maternal research for, let's just leave it as a decade, but maybe a decade plus for some of us. Yeah, right. Yeah. Those numbers are not too important, but all experts here. And I also wanted to add that this talk will be primarily focused on the research that these women have been doing, but also we're hoping to address some of the questions that have been coming in. When most of you registered for this talk, we offered you a chance to pose a question that you might have that's a pressing issue or personal issue or anything like that. We were flooded with questions. So I did try to condense some of those questions and direct them at a single person, and that will be the first half hour. But the second half hour, if there's something that you'd like to talk about via the chat box, feel free to pose questions, comments, anything else that strikes your fancy there. But I wanted to add that due to the huge amount of questions that we've had, we decided that next month we will be focusing on the COVID issue again. But this time the subtopic will be mental health and mothering, because most of I shouldn't say most, but a good chunk of the questions that came in had a lot to do with the guilt and the sense of being anxious and how to support our kids and do all those things that are on our shoulders every day. So the questioning today won't focus as much on that because this is focusing more on academic research, but next month, stay tuned, like us on Facebook and you'll get all the information that you need. We don't have a date yet because it was a spontaneous decision to do that follow-up, but that will be coming at you too. So I wanted to talk a little bit before we got going of some of the research that I've been doing on this. I've put some Facebook surveys or Survey Monkeys out on Facebook over the past couple of months, somewhat out of curiosity. This was not IRB approved or anything. It was more just to inform me as the executive director of IMS, but also, you know, just out of curiosity of what other people are experiencing. So last spring, when I offered a survey that was saying how much extra work women are doing, 70% of mothers said that they added 5 hours or more to what they were already doing in terms of supporting their kids' schoolwork. And that was only schoolwork and on top of what they had already been doing. 30% of moms said that they had added 12 hours or more to their week on top of what they were already doing. 75% of male partners, according to the females that responded, were kicking in 4 hours or less, with 35% of male partners not contributing even 1 hour. So I think the time crunch is certainly coming through, again, the questions that came in, you know, how to create balance, how to keep publishing, how to do all of those things when we're adding in not only the physical presence of our kids, but the extra demands that are coming in from a lot of the teachers and school districts as we're doing more in terms of e-learning. The more recent survey that I put out was looking more at what's going on in terms of how women are reevaluating their participation in waged work. And the reason for that is I had seen just a few weeks after we had started sheltering in place, or many places had, that I think 14% of women were seriously considering stepping out of waged work. And from what I'm hearing, those numbers are already going up. What I saw via the most recent research is that 40% of moms right now are very unhappy with their current work situations. 6% have already quit. 11% intend to very much reduce, significantly reduce their hours. And, and then another 23% want to scale back, but can't. So there's those that have the option to scale back, but then there's also those that are unhappy, but don't have a lot of options available to them in terms of putting that into action. 75% of moms listed one of the reasons as I can't juggle work and home. And I think, again, we'll be addressing some of that today in terms of mothers oftentimes being the linchpins in families and the pressure that we feel for that. 50% said the primary reason was because their kids would not be going to school, and 35% said that childcare was a major factor for them. And those numbers don't quite, they add up obviously to more than 100 because participants could mark more than one reason for why they wanted to step out of waged work. Respondents also said that 60%, for those that were intending to stay in work, 60% said that they were worried about stepping off the career ladder, and 42% said that workplace flexibility was a major issue. So, and it's that last data point that I wanted to introduce Dr. Nicole Wiley, because she does a lot with, she's a professor of English, and she works at Kent State University, and she does a lot with the mentoring program as a coordinator for her campus and is involved in mentoring junior and mid-career academics. She's going to be highlighting her own data that she's been collecting that focuses specifically on academics. But one of the questions that came in, or many that I've sort of condensed into a single question, is how to engage with our academic institutions. And I would say that in a lot of ways this carries over outside of academia as well, in terms of more traditional places of employment, to how do we secure the support, flexibility, and compassion for performance reviews and our daily work as employees, and what kind of support has been effective other places that we can advocate for to our own administrations, and what solutions have been meaningful, doable, efficient. So basically, how can we effectively advocate for ourselves and other moms who are going through this so that we don't see those huge numbers of withdrawal from the workplace?
And I wish I had magic bullets, you know, for all of that. So I am Nicole Willey. I know it's a weird pronunciation, but I work at Kent State University, Tuscarawas. So just really briefly about me, my campus, to get tenure and promotion in the Kent State University system, you have to do research. And in my department, you have to do slightly less to get associate professor, but the same as Kent faculty to be a full professor. I also, I will just say, not because I'm super proud of myself, but to highlight the problems, I am the first woman who was ever a full professor on my campus. So just to kind of give you a little bit about we have a much higher teaching load. It's typically 4-4. Mine is not, because I run the mentoring program on my campus, but you know, it's a mix of administrative and teaching. And then in addition to that, of course, we are expected to maintain research productivity, especially if we want to break through that associate professor glass ceiling. So I have been interested for a long time, and then it ramped up when I started the mentoring program on my campus. I've been really interested in parental and care work policies in academia, and how, especially in the US, as a nation, we are lagging behind. And then in university systems, we are lagging even further behind than some places in the business sector. And so a lot of my work, and it definitely has been more than a decade because I'm getting up there, but a lot of my work has been about how can we how can we do exactly what Katie is asking, which is what supports do we need? How do we support particularly mother scholars and moms that are in academe? And then how can we show what works and then kind of move that out into larger systems? And so the kind of depressing reality that I'm sure isn't going to be a surprise to probably anybody at all on this webinar is that, you know, I just saw yesterday, the US is 34 out of 35 countries. I think, Katie, you were probably the one who posted that, and that's why I saw it. So the US is at 34 out of 35 countries, wealthy nations, in terms of being a pleasant place to live and raise a family. We know that we don't follow the most basic standards for care leave and maternity leave, and most places don't extend to any kind of paternity leave. We don't have that guaranteed 14 weeks paid. We don't have, if it's a heterosexual relationship, we don't have a mom being able to do 14 weeks and then stack that with a dad doing 14 weeks. And you see in a lot of other places that if people can do that stacking, what they actually have is much better bonding between the father and the children as well, which then allows for some gender norms to break in the family. You know, those old gender norms kind of can split up. Everybody kind of can appreciate how hard the care work is, and just better outcomes for everybody, better outcomes for the family, better outcomes for the children. So, so the first thing I want to say is that, you know, just nationally, in our context here in the United States, or in my context here, what we need is universal health care. We need some type of, not just universal pre-K, but fully subsidized, funded, excellent childcare. We need to move the work of the family away from just these individual units and make sure that the whole, you know, that we are all supporting and behind those things. And then we need some type of minimum paid, I think, parental leave / care leave. So it's not just about a mom, and, you know, and everybody can kind of take part in taking care of the child. So first of all, what I want to say is that's what I actually think we need. Of course, that's completely overwhelming, but part of the work of IAMAS and other groups that I'm sure all of us are involved in is that kind of political advocacy. That's the kind of work, that's what we need. We need change on a larger level, because no individual family and unfortunately no university is going to be able to provide all of those things in a US context. Now, if I worked in Canada, I would have much different data and different things to say, because they just do a much better job. So that's the first bit. But knowing that we can't control for all of that, and that that's some pretty big change that, of course, we all hope is coming, and that we're hopefully working toward less than 100 days till the election. So hopefully we're all working for some of that stuff, but there is stuff that we can do at our university and in that context. So again, I am a senior person on my campus. I'm a senior person in my department in the Kent State system. I have quite a bit of privilege in a variety of, of intersections in my life. And so, you know, one of the things that I want to tell and ask and call people that are here today on is, if you have privilege in your institution, you definitely need to be that voice. If you are sitting at a reappointment, tenure, and promotion table, if you are part of personnel decisions, raising your voice and making sure that you are somebody who is demanding transparency in the policies, demanding that the policies be applied fairly across different demographic groups. We know it doesn't happen, but we need to be the voice to kind of ensure, be the conscience of the table, and make sure that we're pointing out when people have their blind spots. And if we are in a position in our institution where we actually can start to think about, you know, the two intertwining things are always culture and policy. So you need both. You need to have culture shifts. You need to be a voice for those things that you want to see happening, but then you also need to have that backed up in policy. if you are a person who can advocate for certain policies, if you can take things to your faculty council or whatever you call them at your institution and say, look, it is high time that we really think about, at my institution at Kent State, we call it tolling. Some places call it like a stop on the tenure clock or something like that. If you're somebody who can advocate for tolling and not just getting the policy written, but then making sure that the people at the RTP table don't penalize people for using tolling. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do. Another thing that we can do, and I do want to talk more about tolling based on my data in just a second, but so, you know, advocating for policy and culture change includes the stuff like tolling, possibly allowing for and figuring out how to do part-time on the tenure track, because that really is a helpful thing when institutions have that for some people. Thinking about how can we help our contingent faculty have the same kinds of protections that tenure track faculty have, whether that contingent faculty is full-time non-tenure track or part-time, what kinds of things should we be advocating for those groups of people. And then thinking too about the fact that a lot of mother scholars, and I bet a lot of people in this room right now, actually find themselves drawn to interdisciplinary and collaborative work, because we know that these things that we're studying touch so many different, we need different kinds of knowledges to bring to bear on the stuff that we're interested in. And so valuing interdisciplinary and collaborative work, recognizing, for instance, that collaborative work shouldn't be halved in the way that it's counted, like it is in my department handbook, but it should actually just count as, you know, I co-write an article with somebody, that should just count as 100% one article that I've written, because any of us who have done collaborative work know it actually, in some ways, takes more time and is a little bit more difficult to do that collaborative work. So the importance of interdisciplinary and collaborative stuff. And then there's some social stuff that we can do as well. If we are somebody who is heading a committee, we can be somebody who doesn't just look at somebody, you know, here's the group, here's their teaching schedule, therefore we can meet at, you know, 4 p.m. on Thursday, which a lot of people who are responsible for picking up kids know that just, you know, that simply doesn't work. So actually using doodle polls and understanding that people, not just parents, but that everybody on the campus have full lives outside of, you know, their teaching schedule and their other committees, and to try to have some fair scheduling and some things that can accommodate everybody, as well as thinking about what kinds of things you can do really locally. Do you have breastfeeding stations, not just for faculty, but also for students and staff? Do you have any kinds of peer mentoring groups or affinity groups that kind of help folks that are in marginalized positions, one of which is being a mother in academia? You know, what kinds of things, what ways can you as an individual actually, you know, just lend that ear and that support to somebody who's going through stuff that maybe, you know, my kids are 15 and 12 now, I'm not in those early days of parenting, but what kinds of things can you do to support folks? So, okay, so those are some of my suggestions of things that we can do. I forgot to I was gonna turn my timer on and I didn't, Katie. So how much time do I have left? I don't want to go
A little bit over, but if you want to wrap up with a couple ideas, one of the things that I was
I'm literally in the first paragraph of what I had to say. So I'm so sorry, everybody. I will simply say this and know that Jess is going to pick up on some of the things that I'm talking about here. So I had some serious research inertia during the, you know, shelter at home in March and April. Early May, I put out a survey. It was IRB exempt status about parenting and COVID. And I am actually going to link my article into the chat when I'm done here, because actually I was able to get a piece out. It basically took some of my ideas about the parental policies we need to see in academia and then added in the COVID data. So I had 221 respondents, 216 of them were mothers and 201 of them were partnered. And so the stuff that Katie was talking about very much is reflected in my survey as well. The extra work that moms are doing, the in most cases, lack of extra work that dads and male partners are doing, worries about division of labor being kind of calcified into relationships, you know, from during this time. But I wanted to say let's just say two big points here. One is, and we were kind of talking about this before we started, we have actually seen that we can work remotely. And in some cases, this is a real boon for parents of young children. I understand that everybody's home is different and that not everybody can tune in. But if we don't demand video, I mean, such a small thing, but don't demand that somebody show up with video. Just let them be there. They can be nursing their baby, they can be exercising, but they're listening to the meeting and they're able to, you know, chime in when it's appropriate. So allowing for Zoom and remote, I hope, is something that we're going to be able to carry through into the future. The other final thing I just wanted to say is that tolling seems like a really positive thing, that somebody should have this extra year to produce research, you know, before they get to tenure. But the COVID survey really pointed out a couple of key points. One is it only helps junior faculty who are tenure track. There's nothing that's helping anybody who's part-time or non-tenure track or mid-career scholars who still are having a shutdown of labs, maybe losing out on grant opportunities, and they're still going to really be behind. So, so tolling, and then on top of that, we know that there is all kinds of data that men use tolling differently than women do. I don't think that that means we throw tolling out, but I do think it means we need to get more creative with thinking through how tolling really could help the populations that it's meant for, but also being creative. How can we extend some of those same courtesies to people who aren't necessarily up against a tenure clock? And finally, and this is the one that's the head scratch, and I'm interested in people's ideas, we don't necessarily want to put off getting tenure. Tenure is security. Tenure usually comes with a raise, or at least the promotion part does. We don't necessarily want to put it off, and yet we're in a global pandemic. How can we be more realistic about the requirements that we're expecting of everybody? Okay, I'm sorry. There's more to say, but thank you. Thank you.
And I'm sure towards the end, when we have questions coming in, you'll be able to hopefully draw on some of that data too, as people are asking more specific questions that dive into the data that you just shared.
Sure.
So our second speaker is, and I hope I don't mangle your name as well, Dr. Jessica Leveto. I'm going to go with that. It's an associate professor of sociology at Kent State University. She is the co-founder and administrator of PhD Mamas. Many of you in the audience are likely part of that group, and is a mother of 3, so am I. Dr. Leveto will connect her work as a sociological social psychologist in identity and emotion to the difficulties many caregivers face in academia today. Dr. Leveto will discuss the connections between identity, commitment, emotion, and the conflict COVID has presented in our successful enactment of these identities as our worlds have collided. She will reflect on data that was just shared and the themes that emerged within PhD Mamas in recent months, as well as her experience as a mother of a 4, 5, and 20-year-old during the COVID crisis.
Hi, thank you. I hope my internet's stable. I am actually, like many of us, we're traveling. My partner's father is ill, so I am shacked up in a house. So you're freezing. Can you hear me? Okay.
We're able to hear you.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. And when you freeze up, I won't get too nervous. You know, it's nice to hear Nicole talk about the importance of mentorship, and in part, some of the work that I'm going to fall back on is because of, in part, Nicole's mentorship. I was actually in her mentoring program, and she talked about putting a survey out once everything had happened, and I happened to be a survey researcher, and I said, sure, let me take a peek. And so I helped her tweak a little bit of it. And then she said, hey, do you want to help me write this article? And I'm like, I don't know where I'll find time. But she did include me in this, and then she offered me her data. So I have been exploring the data on a couple different levels. And so I have used some qualitative analysis to look at some of the themes that have emerged in Dr. Willey's data, but also to tie it to my own work as a sociological social psychologist. And before I run way over, I'm gonna hit my timer too. So I have, my history as a sociological social psychologist specifically looks at identity work, emotion, and mental health. And one of the first things that Nicole mentioned, she says, wait till you read some of these narratives, you know, there's a lot of emotion. And so immediately I was ding, 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 let's look at how, you know, emotion then operates in these spaces, because while it's emotion, it's also the fact that we are operating into very salient identities. And for us, and for the work that I do out of identity theory, identity is essentially the internalization of role enactments. And so when we think of ourselves as a mother or as a scholar, these, to many of us, are really highly salient, highly important, valued, often enacted positions. And one of the kind of the posits of identity theory talks about the time we have, right? The commitments that we can play out and attend to. And I feel personally and professionally, these have collided in a way that the two most salient identities for myself have been, you know, that of being a mother and that of being a scholar and a faculty member and a teacher and a researcher, which we can talk about how those are also additional identities, right? The researcher, teacher, service entities that we enact. So what's interesting to me as I started to look into the data was the number one thing that came up was time. Mm-hmm. There's just not enough time. And so we are working within a finite amount of space to do a lot of things that we had assistance to pre-COVID. And for many of us, you know, we were doing an exorbitant amount of this even before COVID. Myself, I have been, when I started to really reflect on my own expertise in the area, I called up a mentor of mine and I said, I don't know if I'm a scholar in this area. And she said, Jessica, you know much more than you think you know. You've been a mother. I've been a mother now for 21 years in academic spaces. I got pregnant as a sophomore. I went through graduate school as a single mother and found my partner that I've been with, and then had my second child during my third year on the tenure track, and my third child, my fourth year on the tenure track. And I actually took advantage and was one of the first people to take advantage of those tolling policies that Nicole spoke to. And so PhD Mamas was kind of born out of necessity. It's a Facebook group you can find as PhD Mamas. Just make sure you answer the screening questions. We actually have 78 or so people just sitting in limbo, waiting to enter the group because they haven't answered the questions. So definitely answer the questions. But this came after, I want to think if it was actually a week before the presentation I did at the North Central Sociological Association in Cleveland. That presentation came a week before I found out I was pregnant with my last child. And one of the things that the data showed, you know, doing the review of literature for a presentation I was on about mothers in academia was, you know, one child on the tenure track's okay. Mm-hmm. Too much, and two, you know, the data shows there's a deep drop off of women who exit the labor force when they have that second child. And what it is it's not so much we can't do the work anymore. It's that the institution is not structured for space for mothers in particular who are also doing this. I mean, so what's interesting when I'm going through, kind of get back to the data a little bit, when I'm going through the data and I'm seeing a lot of the previous work in social psychology as far as women speaking to, it's impossible. This burden is falling on me. It's impossible for me to do everything I need to do. We are high achievers. If we have a PhD or a master's degree, these advanced degrees that take us to the places that we are in academia, we have been high achievers. And most likely that means we're high achievers as mothers and parents and caregivers, where we give a lot in what we do, but we're running up against walls. We're running up against walls that exist that structural changes can help alleviate, but will not make go away. So I think spaces like PhD Mamas have a special place in all of our hearts because we can go vent. There's a few spaces, academic mamas, tenure track moms, I believe. There's a few other mother groups in Facebook and on social media. And I do follow a number of them, and I do think they all kind of have their own vibe or culture that has developed. My goal is always to provide an inclusive space My advisor, who I spoke to, Dr. Rhonda Matthews from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, was my mentor in my master's program 20 years ago, and has remained a close friend and ally. As a Black woman, has taught me so much about creating inclusive spaces. And she's the co-admin on that page, and purposefully so, because she can see things in ways that I may not be able to, and I recognize and value that. As the group grows, I think the administrative team and the moderating team will have to grow also, and I hope that that reflects the diversity of the group. I think that we've seen in recent months an influx of junior scholars and graduate students who are very, very concerned with the progression into their careers. They've seen a job market completely evaporate. They've seen job offers rescinded. And so it's a scary time to be in academia in general, and even scarier for those of us that happen to be caring for other humans and providing for them. And I'll answer some questions related to the research, but some of the things that I think is important for us as faculty, as parents, and as researcher scholars is that we remain flexible. That was a theme that came up over and over again in the data. What do you need? We need flexibility, we need transparency, we need clarity, we need some level of certainty, we need leadership, which hopefully in our institutions we're finding, but then we also need to emulate that leadership. And I think that speaks to what Dr. Willey was speaking of, as far as we need to help those where we have privileges, and when we operate in privileged spaces, we need to help those folks and continue to do that. So be flexible, be resourceful, be resilient. I think many of us already are. We've gotten to this point because of our resiliency. Find support. I encourage you to find support, whether that be on PhD Mamas or another social media group, or something that has nothing to do with academia. There are a number of spaces for moms that you can find a group that will be supportive of you in a number of ways. Where you can lean on family and extended family, do so. Some of the things is be honest, authentic, and vulnerable. I think that when we do that, we show our students and junior colleagues and graduate students that it is possible, that it doesn't always look pretty. Sometimes it looks like you're sitting on the floor in somebody else's home with shoddy internet trying to do something. But it's important that you're honest and authentic in your own struggle. And again, I say this with some privilege, right? This is totally recognizing that I have tenure now, and that I am a white woman. And I can be vulnerable in some situations that my colleagues may not be able to be. So operate in those spaces that you can enact that privilege. So I think I'll leave it there. I think I'm butting up against my 8 minutes, and I will stop, and I look forward to hearing what Dr. CohenMiller has to say.
I actually wanted to circle back quickly though, because one of the questions that I wanted to address to you earlier, what you sort of alluded to in a way when you were saying, I have all this research and I want to dive into it. A lot of people were talking about just how do we keep the publishing cycle going when we have all of this extra, all the extra demands on us. And I think Nicole had also mentioned too about perhaps universities reconsidering co-authoring as an option. But is there something that you have found helpful when you're looking at all this great juicy data that you want to get moving on, but just feel like there's just zero time?
So I'm going to say this not only because of COVID, but because for 21 years I've been doing this as a mother, trying to hide in corners. And as I get older, I find it harder to stay up all night. And I don't want to. I just frankly want to do it. I did it. And I tell my students, I remember my son being 5 years old, standing at the top of the steps, and it was probably 4 in the morning. And I was a single mother at the time, and he's standing at the top of the steps. And, are you coming to bed tonight? and so he was very concerned with my all-nighters. And now I mean, even with support, I have a great partner, it's hard to find the time. I will say this, find it where you can and give yourself grace. One of the things that I tried last week was to offer my children, I said, if you give me 20 minutes, I will give you a really good snack. But I need 20 minutes. I mean, I would even go for 10, 20 minutes. And it was a negotiation, and I got a minute and a half. And then I started, okay, go, you're interrupting me already. And and within 5 minutes, I had 8 interruptions. So 8 interruptions in 5 minutes, it's sometimes impossible, and that's okay. But I think we advocate for those differences. And honestly, just having an administration that understands it, and those of us that can get on the committees for reappointment and tenure, get on them. It's very important that we're on them and that women are on them also.
Thank you, Jessica. So with that, we are going to segue over to Dr. Anna CohenMiller, who is a professor of education and focuses on equity and inclusion in higher education. She works at Nazarbayev, maybe, University in Kazakhstan, and runs the Consortium of Gender Scholars and the Mother Scholar Project. She will share some of her research and work related to the COVID crisis, focusing on arts-based study that she conducted with mothers in higher education during quarantine. The study was conducted with one of her PhD students, Zana Azkanova, and is intended to bring awareness to the quote-unquote reality of working at home with children who are also at home studying, which I know that the last couple months that I went through with that was, you want to talk about not pretty, and outright bribery sometimes going on there. So I'm very much looking forward to what you have to contribute, Anna.
Great. Thank you so much for putting this together, Katie. And I feel really privileged to be here and with everyone that's here and hearing. So just to kind of turn back. And so again, I'm Anna CohenMiller and I'm out in Kazakhstan in Central Asia. I work at a university that's fairly new. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And so we are establishing all of these policies and we're creating the foundation for how we're moving forward. We're a research university. We have partnerships with, Cambridge University in the UK, also, Madison and UPenn in the US, as well as others around the world, right? And so what that means is that we have a bit of a culture clash at times, right? Trying to figure out what is the best way forward, right? What does it mean, right? For instance, right, as Nicole, you were mentioning about changing tables. And so who are we providing changing tables for? And does that mean that we're recommending for our students to be on campus and to hang out and bring their children? I think at the beginning, the idea was, no, you're right, you kind of the more US model, you leave your children at home, they're not seen, right? If you're shown as a woman to be a mother also, then you are outed and you are considered, right, less valuable, less worthwhile. But what we've seen on campus and is that, through this work, as was mentioned, I had started the Consortium of Gender Scholars, and this was interdisciplinary also, right? So working with Dr. Jennifer Lewis in the Graduate School of Business, I'm the Graduate School of Education, and then also we had someone from anthropology also. We wanted to highlight and bring awareness to gendered issues and gendered research. And so what we've seen is that, we have a lot of parents on campus. A lot of our students are parents. And so, and by and large, there are mothers, but there are also fathers, and there's grandparents, and there are siblings or babysitters or nannies that are coming to that the parents are trying to negotiate with in order to find solutions, right? So if you're supposed to be in class, for instance, in the Graduate School of Education, we primarily now have these intensive, when we were face-to-face, one class for about 2 weeks straight, that was from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. And so if you're nursing, what are you supposed to do? Or if you have a toddler and, they need you at some point, right? Like, what are you supposed to do? And so, fortunately, we have been able, and I think this is a bit because of the newness of the university and the willingness for the university to see these needs, the work of Gen Con here, and getting a bit of, in this case, right, kind of the social capital, as both Nicole and Jessica, you were mentioning, right, having a bit of privilege, even though we don't technically have tenure, and I haven't been promoted to associate professor, so I'm still an assistant professor, but I've been here for 5 years now. And so 5 out of, actually for the Graduate School of Education, 7 years of the graduate school is showing a consistency. And so we have many changing tables now on campus, which is huge. And we have a mother's room or a parent's room, and we have indoor playgrounds that are then, you know, for 6 months of winter, there hadn't been a place for children to go. And so this allows, and the terminology that I like to use, instead of supporting mother scholars, right? So this is kind of the terminology and what I started using at the very beginning. When I started researching mother scholars was when I was doing my dissertation and when I became pregnant with my first child. And I noticed that me and my colleagues were being treated differently because it was all based on just luck of the draw, right? I had a faculty member that maybe understood that I had really bad, morning sickness, and someone else had a faculty member that didn't understand. And so those practices then were enacted in different ways. And so from then, right, it became just more and more clear that we need to draw awareness to the presence of mothers in academia. And so we are broadly kind of devalued, and at least in the West, right? So in Western nations. And so I don't know if I can share my screen, if that's okay, briefly. And so I'm going to share a couple different things. Okay, so let's see. First, let's see. Okay, not sure if it's going to work. That's okay. Disabled, maybe. So what I'll do here is I will share a couple one website. And so I started the Mother Scholar Project as a way to highlight the presence of mothers in academia. It's a whole long list of people from all around the world that continues to grow. And it just shows that whether you're a graduate student, whether you're a full professor, whether you're a professor emeritus, really globally, we exist, right? So this is the first thing, and this sets then the basis for this current study that I've been working on with then one of our PhD studies, Jana Izabekova, and I have been so blown away by some of this imagery, which again, it looks like, oh, here, I can share, perfect. Thank you. 1 second. So very quickly. All right. So this is the Mother Scholar Project. So awareness, community empowerment since 2015. So people decide that they want to be a part of it. They want to share. They want to help show that they have a presence. They exist. They are a mother. And they identify, their name or the name they want to be identified with, their ethnic background and where they live, their number of children, the ages, and then their position. So that's been the Mother Scholar Project. Then I will show you here. So can you see the image? So, right, so child laying on the ground, right? A couple chairs, many materials and children's work. The child is doing, it looks like the yoga, one of the yoga videos, and the table along with a desktop on it. And so what the woman says, Mother Scholar says, being a single parent and all of this is wild. I can't go to the grocery store unless I bring my daughter with me. I can't have a private conversation with a friend about my own fears and worries because my daughter will eavesdrop. I definitely can't vent about my frustration with my ex or dad, how he's not handling all of this. I can't do a virtual meeting with a therapist because I have no privacy until my daughter sleeps at night, by which point I don't have anywhere near the emotional energy to be able to talk to a therapist. I have absolutely no privacy. Here's another photo, right? So we see a room, a computer, many toys strewn about, a bed. This is my office at 7 a.m. on Saturday, but it's not really an office. It is the corner of the playroom and a surplus guest room. It is the only desk in the house with the main computer, so I share it with my 7-year-old. When she is working online, I cannot work. When I am teaching or having meetings, she cannot do school. And the room is awash in toys and a video game center and other kids' stuff. My things are in a cardboard box on the floor. This is the most empty, silent, contemplative time of the week for this room. Otherwise, it is chaos. And so I recognize I've come to the end of my time. So I want to share this one last thing, which I will link to, or actually two things. So we mentioned, Jessica, you mentioned about time, right? That across all of the data, people are talking about time. And this is a quick just word cloud of where I asked people then when they submitted their photos, what was it that they wanted? How could this help us understand how things could be different? And as you see, the word that's highlighted the most is time. I see more time working, think, know, life, need, children. So what are some steps to address this? Then I started this document for a university, and then others have been asking for it as well. It's a compilation that many of the articles and references are from sociologists from Women in Society, from some crowdsourced information from that listserv. And by and large, right, so this goes back to some of these recommendations that were mentioned. So one way, so instead of having this 1 year off, you can reconfigure metrics, promotion, and tenure, right? So why are we even still considering the same format when something so major has happened? And we're on the verge of deconstructing or undoing any bit of equity we have managed to get. And then, so waiving non-essential service. Is this really the time to reconstruct your curriculum, right? Your PhD program, remove or adjust the use of student feedback, which would also help highlight these inequities that we have noticed for years, right? The discriminatory nature of student feedback for women and those of color, and then paying special attention to consider the support for those with caretaking duties. So I will share that Google Doc. Please feel free to add suggestions at will. And thank you so much for this chance to share this.
So we're going to open up the chat area has been open the whole time, but if you have questions or comments that you'd like to direct to anybody or everybody, please share what you're thinking, share questions that you had. We had a few pop up already. I think one of the ones that I noticed was, so we saw those rooms, Anna, that I think sort of reveal the private of our public selves, which, when we think back, what was it? Maybe 2 years ago, that BBC video that went viral of the guy who's trying to talk about international politics and the kind of wanders in the little walkie thing and, stuff like that, and how that really, was, embarrassing, and the sort of the shame that went about, was around that. And of course, I think many of us now that we're working from home almost all the time and are likely looking at that in the coming months. Do you think that sort of revealing of the private will create this deep change that we've been talking about for so many years? Or do you think that, are you optimistic about that at this point? Or do you think that it's really, one of the questions that came in, do we have to sit idly by? Do you think that it's still going to be a fight for awareness and recognition of voices that oftentimes aren't heard on campuses?
So thank you for that question. It's an incredibly important one. And by and large, unless you have privilege, to be able to show your background, to be able to allow a child, or not even allow, right?
Right.
To be able to turn off your camera if you need to, or to have your video intermittent. To have a problem with intermittent video still is only allowed for those with privilege. Because if you're ever in a group conference, if you notice it, if somebody has suddenly been called on, for instance, you're at a Senate meeting, right, let's say, and a junior person or student is called on, you can hear the tone of frustration from others. Well, you need to fix that, right? We can't see you. Why can't we see you, right? Why is your video messed up? You need to call back in. And so I'm hopeful that there can be changes broadly, but I don't think it is actually in requiring for sure showing of private spaces. And I think that it should be, I would be wary of encouraging all mother scholars to open up freely, because we have started to see, right, that that feedback, even student feedback, it has started to come out that students are then, they say, oh, it's wonderful to see your child. And then on the comments, right, on the feedback is, oh, it was very unprofessional, right? She brought her child to class, right, in the classroom. Or we see, right, for instance, in Florida, right, the University of Tampa, or which university, that then was saying, at least at first, that they said that you're not allowed to actually caretake for your child at the same time that you're working. And so the complete disregard for this reality, right? And so this study, this photo voice study, the arts-based study, came out of hearing from others that leadership was telling admin in particular that be sure that you don't think of this time of COVID as a vacation. Remember, you're still working. And it's such a disconnect, right, of what the reality is, right? Instead, our administrators are working 24/7, right, to respond to, and so they're working much more than they normally would for their own work to respond and be available, and then for their children. And their children, you have multiple children that are learning online at the same time, or you're living in Kazakhstan, it's very typical that you would live with other adult family members as well. And so, I had one student whose mother is a teacher who's living in the house, as well as 3 children and a cousin also, and they're all trying to teach or learn online at the same time. It's an untenable situation unless we make change.
Another question that had come in previously was centered around how do we help support women who are single mothers? Because obviously, I think everybody here, I don't know if Anna, you said you were partnered or not. I know Nicole and Jessica both alluded to having a partner. How does that sort of shift? Jessica, you've seen both sides of that. How do you think some of those demands shift, and what can we do to help support mothers that are likely facing even more profound challenges right now?
I think that it doesn't fall on those mothers, right? So I think that one of the things that we can do if we are partnered, if we do operate in spaces of privilege, is to lend our support, whether that be, if we're close to them, assistance. I know, I live in a world of kind of distrust with COVID. I don't know what, we've been very much locked down. This is the first time we've left, really. And I was really hesitant to make this trip, but it was needed for my children and my partner to see their grandfather and father. But I think that if we can maybe take on some of that assistance, do you need to get out? Do you need to go? Do you need some time and help watch their children? I don't know if that's possible. And that's at the individual level. Maybe, gosh, I wish I had more answers for you. I know that it was a struggle, and I think, and I've seen some other kind of questions come up, I think for those single mothers and for all of us, we need to have a little bit of grace and understanding that some of the things that we're asking ourselves to do and that's being asked of us is not necessarily possible. And we can't be perfect at everything, so we just need to be okay at some things. I've told this to students who have come into my office in tears. What am I doing trying to go to school? I'm a single mother, right? So I'm trying to think of what would I tell my students? And essentially it is prioritize what is an immediate need in the moment and juggle as best as you can, and try not to drop all the balls at once. Don't drop everything at once. If a couple of them fall, it's okay. It's okay that you have a messy house. It's okay that the kids have extra screen time, which is something that came up in the data. This guilt over screen time. It's okay. But I also just think that, in those positions as we move up, that we have to have some level of accommodations to help serve those folks.
And that was something I was going to mention, the screen time, because that came up as well in some of the research that I've been doing, but also the idea of recognizing sort of that the bar was here, and it's okay to have that bar be lowered a little bit, because it's from what I've been reading, our kids are going to see how we are dealing with this crisis, not so much what we're doing. So the fact that, if we give them an extra 45 minutes of screen time or more or whatever, and are able to kind of maintain
Not gonna
some
judge.
semblance of peace and sort of, you know, get what we need done so that we can refocus on their needs at a different time. All of that, that sense of love and support and patience will very much outweigh, you know, that seeing us be so angry with ourselves for not being able to live up to the expectations that many of us will probably say we didn't want on ourselves in the first place. I mean, that was more of what Adrienne Rich said, you know, in terms of women born, you know, that there's the institution of motherhood and then there's the act of feminist mothering and how those two can be quite different. But then you're trying to still merge in with societies and, you know, social expectations of work and what a worker looks like. And those are certainly incongruous more now than ever, even though I don't know if I necessarily dub myself an optimist, but I do think that we're at the precipice of really deep change if we maximize on some of the public-private sort of debates that are going on and what technology looks like, because these are questions and problems that have been very much part and parcel of being a working mother for, you know, centuries. So how can we now shift the conversation in a way that allows those voices that weren't part of these conversations before to be really heard? So I'm trying to see if are there any last questions that those in the audience wanted to chime in with? I see a few different comments here.
So a couple of questions also, if you want to see the Q&A that seems to get to the way that I understand it is about so if you're refused your request for flexibility or you want to do something that might be different than maybe others are doing, and or this is how I interpreted it. And the one point that I was going to mention with this is, so we've mentioned, right, the three of us, this concept of privilege, and I have a different level of privilege, and one, all of us, I guess, do, right? And what I've been reading about is and thinking about, and this was one reason that we created the Consortium of Gender Scholars, is to be able to have a collective voice. Right, so going forward, just yourself. This is why collective action, right, in the U.S. and other places happen. So you're not just outed as the one person that is requesting a support, a flexibility, and instead you're going with others. And whether this is the affinity group, right, as Jessica you mentioned, or these the social media spaces, often have suggestions of how to find other people to bring these ideas forward, or to go to the Nicole on campus and say, how do we, right, like, how do we move this forward? This is an issue I'm having, and I know there's others, right? You're not alone, right? This is part of the awareness, right? None of us are alone. There's 90 of us here, right? We're in this together, and so how can we move it forward?
And with that, one of the closing questions that I wanted to ask each of you is that IMA stands for the International Association of Maternal Action and Scholarship. So action is right at the heart of what we do. And so what action steps do you think, particularly when we're talking about noting privilege and how to help others, but also in terms of those that may not have as much privilege, how can we have a sense of agency in this, have a sense that there's something that we could do? So I wanted to ask each of you if you thought that there was something, and it could be very, very small, or it could be quite large, in terms of something that we can put our energy into that would help more mothers thrive through this pandemic.
Well, if you're in the US, you need to vote. You need to register people, you need to vote. We need to get change. We need to get change in this country. I think it gets overwhelming, though, to think of those big pieces that really do need to move. So one of the things that that Kent State is doing in terms of online and remote teaching is they talk about moving the needle. And so it's not that everything has to be perfect. And Jess said this too. It's not perfection. It's not that you have to you don't have to agree to watch somebody's kid for 20 hours a week. But if you know that person and you can say, look, could I know you don't want me in your house. Can I pick up groceries for you? You know, I mean, there are small individual things we can do to help a couple people. But yeah, I see it as there's the large action, there's the institutional action, and then there's the individual level action. And we all have to kind of find, I think, the places, while we're still caring for ourselves, the places that we can move in those areas.
Thank you. Jessica or Anna, did you want to chime in on that? Both of you have, Jessica, you had a great sort of laundry list of and do this and do this and do this, which was fantastic, of particularly sort of the emphasis on grace, I think you mentioned. And Anna too, I think you had a few really great bullet points, but is there anything that you want as sort of your closing thought in terms of how we can move forward in a way that is supportive of ourselves and others?
I think that we, we support other women, support other caregivers. And I know we focus on mothers here, but caregivers in general. I'm watching this on a different level as a sandwich generation right now, and at little sleep, and the caregiving that's going into our parents and our children. So it's there's a lot of caregivers in a variety of ways. And I think, externally, I agree with Nicole, you have to vote. I have joined up with local groups to advocate for those things in the community, additional service that's difficult to do in this time. But I think it's very, very important that people understand the importance of voting and being involved in supporting labor in general, and not just labor as it has been, but labor it should be as inclusive to policies that support family. Frankly, if there wasn't family, there wouldn't be a lot of the things that we do. If there wasn't children, we wouldn't have students. And so we need to, I teach a social family class. And when we talk about family, we talk about how the United States, they value family so much. And then you push a little bit and you say, really, how much do they value if our policies are enacted in a way that limit, people choose to not have children at all. Maybe they want, maybe they don't, but they choose to not have children because of the time in which we're living and the lack of support in the community and the structural. So I think that absolutely voting, becoming and placing yourselves in positions, educating. Obviously, we all are doing that, educating our students about structural change and how it happens. But ultimately, I think the one thing, if nothing else, that you take is have some grace for yourself and for others. And when you show that grace in the leadership that you have, and we all have some level of privilege, all of us, if we're teaching students, because we have some power over them, is that we extend some level of flexibility and grace to them as well, because there is this kind of pay it forward model. And I have been impressed on many levels with some of the institutional supports that Kent has provided at Kent State, with that leadership and kindness and leading with that. One person had mentioned, has there been any systems that we have seen that has done good? I think Dr. Cohen-Miller's list provides some institutions and language that institutions are implementing. I also would encourage people to look at Cal State's system, which over the last few weeks has implemented some of accommodations and policy adjustments, including extended family FMLA, extended paid FMLA. So as far as the United States context and institutions, there are some that are really, really trying to be accommodating, and others that are failing miserably.
Thank you.
That y'all have touched upon so much, right? I feel like I'm trying to think of then how to bring it all together. For me, it comes back to awareness, right? So the first bit for ourselves, to be aware what's going on with ourselves also, right? So this goes to the grace and the gentleness, and to then listen, right? So this is listening to our students. What is it that they actually need, right? What is it right now, right? So maybe I'm thinking that they need more or less Zoom, or they need more interaction or less, right? What do they actually say that they need? And then this can be translated to administration, to leadership, and up the path, right? Like, so how can we help then leadership understand what is it that caretakers need, that mothers need, that other people are needing, right? And so how do we get people to listen? Some of the solutions, there's continued training in implicit bias, or trainings in bystander training, diversity training. And so as we move forward with, promotion committees and tenure committees, we need to make sure that everybody on those committees are trained. And so if they are not trained to understand the regular issues of equality, inequality, and the systems that are at play, then how are we expecting them, how can we expect them to be able, or ourselves, to understand the additional obstacles that are being faced, right? So we're all trying our best. So that helps if that's the groundwork. We're all trying our best, and yet people aren't aware of what's going on somewhere else. And so if we can gently move that forward and show the examples, as you know, participants here have asked for these examples, and then work towards that. It's helped me to get involved in things like this, right? That this is then the action step. So from awareness, listening to what others need, to myself, and then taking that action of coming together, of making the Google Doc that's not perfect. I keep on finding things that could be revised, but okay, I'm adding more things and other people are contributing, and it helps to share whatever information that you have. This is in particular a point that this is where I'm hopeful, right? That I think they can suddenly change, that they could be a chance for showing that you can work from home, even though that may not be ideal for everyone, right? So you also want to listen to what actually works best. It's not, oh yay, you get to work from home and everybody's happy, right? So what works, and as we move forward and to do it together.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole, Jessica, and Anna. Your insight, your research, all of that has been very valuable and important now more than ever, I think. And it's interesting to hear where things are moving from a research standpoint, but also personally, the stories that you've shared, I think, are very important to those who have joined us today. I wanted to point out that we will be doing another talk, and I'm hoping that one will be a little bit more nitty-gritty, focusing more on the mental health and some of the more direct points of negotiation that we can have with our partners, with our employers, and that will be next month. So if you follow us on Facebook, you'll be sure to see when that is going to be happening, since we don't have a date just yet. Keep in mind that these are free talks, but if you are in a place to donate, we very much appreciate it. If you go up through the chat postings, I think there was a couple links there that you could look at. And I look forward to those of you who will be joining us next month. Please share this video with others, as well as the news that comes out for the next one, because I think, as we've been saying for the past hour, we as working mothers certainly need more support. All mothers, I think, need more support in now more than ever, as I said, because of the additional demands that I think all of our research is showing that we're taking on right now. So I thank you for sharing what you know, and I look forward to connecting with you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks. Bye.
It was amazing. Thanks.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.